Welcome to the Geneva Macro Labs online talk. I have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Martin Liebi. Martin is the head of capital markets in the area legal finance services, regulatory services at PricewaterhouseCoopers in Zurich. He holds a PhD in law from the University in Zurich, an LLM from Stanford, a master's degree in general management from Harvard, and is admitted as attorney at law in Zurich and in New York. He is a judge at the Commercial Court of Zurich and lecturer at the University of Zurich in banking and finance. During the next minutes, Martin will talk about how to deal with uncertainty in times of COVID-19, as the pandemic has been severely impacting the global economy. How it will be affected will depend upon the length and the severity of the lockdown. Martin will now help us understand the possible scenarios and their impact on different sectors of the economy. Martin, can you tell me a little bit more about the scenario rationales that you're using?
Yes, I'm very happy to do so. First of all, thanks a lot for having me. So there's basically three base scenarios. It's a V-shaped scenario, it's called the U-shaped scenario, and an L-shaped scenario, and there's certain deviations of it. So when we look at the first scenario, the V-shaped scenario, this would be characterized by a quick shock to the economic system, maybe of a period of during 1 month, but then also very quick development and recovery. Unfortunately, we can say in the COVID-19 situation, V-shaped scenario in most jurisdictions is not going to happen. But interestingly, like also in the last crisis we had to undergo, the financial crisis in 2007, at the beginning there was a lot of talk about the V-shaped scenario, and this seems to be at the beginning of every kind of major crisis. People are very optimistic, think everything will get back to normal very quickly. But then as time progresses and also the severity of the crisis comes a little bit more apparent, and also has an effect on other related industry sectors, not just the industry sector which is affected. And I think COVID-19 this time is a crisis which has from the beginning affected many different sectors, and that's also a little bit problematic, because the reaction to this crisis will be multifaceted and cannot be concentrated just on one individual sector. So the U-shaped scenario becomes more prominent, and the U-shaped scenario is basically something we all hope that we will pan out this time. So it's basically a shock to the system and a lockdown for 2 to 3 months. It will be a sustained recession and will have an impact on GDP during the next quarters, but it is a relatively quick recovery on the grander scale. And what we are all afraid of, obviously, is a kind of a L-shaped scenario or a double U scenario, where we have kind of a prolonged lockdown, and this can come in phases. So for example, it could be that we first have a U-shaped scenario, so like we are now, everything, skies are clearing up again, we'll have a wonderful summer, but then a second wave will strike in September and October, and we will have to shut down again the entire economy. And obviously this would be very devastating. This would have a very drastic, prolonged impact on the economy, not just economy, but also society as a whole. And obviously it's very hard then to really say when we will recover again.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable. So what will be the possible impact of the pandemic on several industries in Germany or in Europe?
So the impact on the different sectors of the industry will be different depending also on the scenarios. But we have clustered here different industry sectors against the impact the COVID-19 situation will have on them. So we have here cluster positive impact, neutral impact, slightly negative impact, negative and very negative. Unfortunately, a few industries are severely impacted, no matter whether it's going to be a U-shaped scenario or an L or W-shaped scenario. So this for sure will going to be passenger transportation, traveling, hospitality, as we can all see. But also the automotive sector is heavily affected because a lot of pundits and politicians use the current crisis also as a means to kind of promote sustainable economies, green economy even more. So, for example, also on the cover of The Economist last week, there was like the question that we should kind of use this as an advantage or an opportunity to actually promote green economy, green industry. There will be sectors which are less heavily affected. So, for example, this is going to be, now I'm not seeing the slides anymore. Maybe we can pull up the slides again. Less affected, obviously, we will be agriculture because, yeah, people have to eat all the time. Although we see at the moment also in certain instances there's a disruption in the value chain, because obviously certain restaurants have been closed and certain farmers have basically to rot their food on the fields because they don't have a buyer for them, which is also a kind of devastating. And it's hopefully we will have next year not a food crisis, because there is increased concern that the disruption of the value chain and the supply chain will have major impacts on food security down the road. Obviously, what is also heavily affected are freight and transportation, because they are heavily dependent on supply chain considerations. And as you know, the supply chain will change, will shift. So we will produce things closer to us, and concerns of supply chain security, stability will have an increased importance over just costs. So also from that perspective, it's safe to assume that certain goods will become more expensive. So we will have a certain degree cost push, inflationary environment in certain goods. Obviously, other goods will we almost have deflationary environment. So there's a lot of goods around. Certain goods people at the moment don't really need, like cars, for example. At the moment, who is buying really a car in an economic unsecure situation? Not so many people. Again, chemicals, industrial manufacturing based on the green agenda will very likely have kind of to reshuffle. The same is also true for production centers, maybe which have been very, will be nearshored or back onshored again. And financial services, credit situation, I mean, depending on how severe this recession will be, obviously at the moment, banks and asset managers are still in good shape. But if there will be a bankruptcy wave, that's obviously also going to impact to a large degree the banking and financial services industry. Other industries are not so heavily affected. So, for example, the energy industry, so electricity, power and so forth, utilities, pharma, life sciences, technology, software are even on an upswing based on obviously the home office situation. And what is pretty much stable is obviously consumer goods and retail food, because yes, people have to eat. That's one of the most basic needs of every person. And so as you can see, there's different impacts, and depending on the scenario, obviously this will have this will also reshape certain things. You know, it depends a lot how this will pan out over the next few months and years.
And Martin, what's your general outlook? Is it rather we will get out of it stronger, or what is maybe a last word that you would like to
Yes.
add?
Yes, I think, you know, we are probably in a very similar situation like in the, and it's a nasty word, the Great Depression in the 1930s. So when you look at the economic indicators, obviously this is not a pleasant time, but I think the good news is that it will pass. And if you look at the long scale of the development of humankind, even in a generation, it's a few years, but it can be very burdensome few years. But I think the good news is there is light at the end of the tunnel, and like in all these crises, it's very safe to assume that we will get out of this stronger. It will be different, but we'll have a stronger society and probably a more resilient society.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Martin. So if you want to come back, if you want to get in touch with us, please reach out on social media. Thank you very much, Martin, and I wish you all a very good day. See you next time soon. Bye-bye.